We'll get underway. So my name is Dominik. I'm currently acting Director of Parliamentary Affairs for the Federal Minister of Citizenship, Immigration and Multiculturalism, the Honourable Jason Kenney, who spoke to you yesterday at the opening ceremonies. And last year I also had the privilege of being involved in the organizing committee for Vadis 2 in Windsor. And I'm currently also the Vice President of the YPCPA in Ottawa. So, welcome to this panel, which is titled Building Modern, Relevant, and Adaptable Cultural Community-Based Organizations. A little bit of a convoluted title, but I work in the government, so that's kind of where that came from. So the purpose is to offer practical lessons that can form the basis for durable initiatives that you can undertake in the Polonia context in the future. And to do this, developing tools for success in this area requires a broad overview from varying perspectives, including the academic, political, and practical organizational perspectives. So it more broadly requires a look inward at our own sense of identity, as well as outward to understand where we find ourselves in our societal context, and also to learn from the experiences of other cultural communities. Furthermore, this panel will focus on the North American context, which I understand differs somewhat from the European context, but I think the discussion here will be of use to everyone. So I'm honored to introduce our three special guests, each with an important perspective. Dr. Lustanski, to my right here, is the president of the Canadian Polish Research Institute and specializes in linguistics and languages. Dr. Lustanski will present to us some of her research on the modern concept of Polish identity in the Canadian context and how it may affect the future direction of Polonia and its initiatives. And I think that this research will resonate well with our American friends in a similar context there. Next we have Mr. Miele Desai, who is currently Director of Programs and Communications at the Munk School of Global Affairs at the University of Toronto, but has previously served as the Manager of Strategic Initiatives for the Right Honourable Stephen Harper, Prime Minister of Canada. During his time in the Prime Minister's office, Miele had the opportunity to interact with a wide variety of cultural communities, and he's willing to share some of his experiences there, and we're very happy to have him as a guest. Further, we have Mr. Tony Miele, who is an accomplished entrepreneur and active member of the Italian-Canadian community, a community that many of us know is well established in Canada, and I think there are many things we can learn from the experiences of Tony and others in the community. So, in the interest of efficiency, each panel member's presentation will be followed by a brief question and answer period within the panel here. And then following all three presentations, we'll open them up to general questions and comments. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Dr. Lustanski to begin her presentation on Polish Canadian identity.
I was doing for my doctoral dissertation. So in sociolinguistic works, as you may know, Poles have been considered a very religious ethno-linguistic community. I would like to try to revise this opinion and find an answer to the question whether the culture-first approach instead of language-first and religion-first view could be currently applied to the description of Polishness. So let's look at a few definitions of ethnic identity. Identity itself is a phenomenon on many bases. In sociolinguistic works, the discussion on ethnicities and identities has shifted away from the notion that these concepts are fixed and constructed in isolation towards the notion that they are ever-changing, complex, and always in negotiation. As Ryan knows, who we are and what we become is tied very closely to the social circumstances in which we find ourselves. Ethnic identity is a socially constructed act and describes your social relationships to the world. It's as much about being as it is about becoming. For Smolwich, who's a famous professor of sociology investigating the Polish group in Australia, acts of identity are constructed from certain fundamental components. He calls them core values. And what he says is, whenever people feel that there is a direct link between their identity as a group and what they regard as the most crucial and distinguishing element of their culture, the element concerned becomes a core value for the group. For the Polish minority group in Australia, small h indicates three fundamental values. It's language, religion, and culture. He argues that in the absence of these core values, our cultural and social systems would suffer eventual disintegration. So these core values make us distinctive. He also maintains that language, in our case, language has been considered the most important one. So this is the most important core value ever since it was banned in the 19th century when Poland was portioned amongst its three powerful neighbors, Austria, Russia, and Russia. It was forbidden to speak the language at school, and parents who organized Polish classes for their children were often threatened with jail or deportation to Siberia. So the attempt to get rid of the mother tongue succeeded in elevating the Polish language to a symbol for the survival of the group. In another study, Professor Roszak from the Warsaw University conducted research in the United Kingdom. It was in the 1980s. And the research was done among Polish combatant immigrants, economic immigrants, and the second generation of Poles. They also declared, all her respondents, that for them, the Polish language is the central component of ethnicity. So my question was, is that the case? And please have a look at the research I did. So I developed a survey that was distributed among two generations of Poles living in Canada, a group of Polish immigrants, also called the first generation Polish immigrants, and the group of the second generation of immigrants called young Polish Canadians, so it would be like you. Workers of the company MCM 2001 in Toronto represented the first generation, whereas students from the Copernicus Polish school in Mississauga represented the second generation. Every speaker filled out a personal questionnaire which aimed to examine the respondents' opinion about the Polish language, their language competence, the participation in the organization's ethnic self-identity, and so on. And together, 215 surveys were analyzed. The study was conducted in 2003. So now, look, I would like to show you just 3 questions, or rather answers to 3 questions only from the research. As you see in this table, so the question was, do you feel Polish? So what the respondents said is that, as you see, 90% of immigrants and 78% of the young Polish Canadians view themselves as Polish. Among the young Polish Canadians, 17% declare hyphened identity, so they feel Polish, hyphen Canadian, whereas 3% of the group refuse a Polish identity. So these self-declarations can be interpreted as showing rather positive effects of Canadian multicultural and multilingual programs that stress the importance of ethnic origins. However, we should bear in mind that these answers are not confirmed by any specific actions and specific social and cultural activities in which they actually participate. So they are just self-declarations. In the next table, we have 7 reasons for self-identification with Polishness. So as you see, for young respondents, they admit that having Polish parents is the fundamental factor determining being Polish. In second position, following Polish traditions and customs was indicated. In the third place, the ability to read and write in Polish was chosen. If you look at the place of birth factor, so that was significant for only half of the number of representatives of the second generation of Polish immigrants. On the other hand, if you look at the first generation immigrants, they present a different ordering of reasons for being Polish. So for them, the place of birth is the first and the most important criterion of Polishness, while parents, having Polish parents is the second one. It's quite interesting that respecting Polish customs and the ability to read and write in Polish are treated equally. So, very short interpretation of this data. You can think that the immigrant group respondents identify themselves with their place of birth, Poland, because it symbolizes their past, so their childhood, adolescence, and to some extent adulthood. So in Poland, they grew up in a very Polish-specific cultural background, received most of their education, developed friendships, and started their families. For many of them, thoughts about Poland engaged them emotionally, especially given that they haven't been able to live a similar lifestyle upon immigration. So it's not surprising that Poland per se becomes a kind of an ideal country with which most of the first-generation immigrants identify. On the other hand, for the young Polish Canadians, Polishness is mainly determined by having Polish parents, not by their place of birth, because even if some of them were born in Poland, the most significant periods of their life have been spent in Canada. And finally, the question which I like most is, what should you do to be Polish? The respondents were asked to pick only one answer, the most important one. And as you see, this analysis, this data doesn't support the thesis about the Polish language being the central core value of the Polish ethnic identity. So for my respondents, to be Polish, one should first of all respect Polish traditions, not language. So note that both generations share this belief, 40% of the immigrant group and 45% of the young Polish Canadians. In the opinion of the second generation, speaking Polish is more essential than teaching Polish to children, whereas the immigrant generation submits the stratification in reverse order. For the immigrant group, the transferring of the mother tongue to the next generation is a more powerful symbol of retention of the language. Why is this evidence significant? There is a theory that says if an ethnic group has tended to emphasize maintenance of its own traditional language, loss of that language will be equated largely with loss of group identity. So in this case, can we say that our native language takes on symbolic rather than communicative functions? I don't know, I don't have an answer to this question. However, you should bear in mind that since the Polish migration rate has decreased noticeably in the last 2 decades, there is very little probability of reinforcing the native language in the Polish minority group in Canada. And also, if you look at Statistics Canada, they also talk about what we call in linguistics a language shift, which is slowly but surely taking place in favor of English. And finally, I would like to briefly talk, it's the very last slide, so don't worry, I'm about to finish. Why? So this is my idea, why the Polish language has lost its primary place among the core values. First of all, I think it's because it's no longer threatened. So, as you know, there were many historical periods where circumstances forced Polish people to leave their homeland. And living abroad allowed them to keep alive a form of Polishness which was banned in Poland. However, right now, people leave Poland because of their own free will. So, their motive of immigration would be mostly economical reasons. And I would suggest that the ethnic self-identity of the Polish community can be best determined by specific features of Canada as a country of settlement. As you know, the teaching of minority languages in Canada, including Polish, receives financial support from various governmental programs facilitating language maintenance in minority groups. On the other hand, even if you can learn Polish every day, the Canadian society becomes linguistically unified quite rapidly.